It's episode 12 of the Neoncast, yes. Just when you thought this thing was dead and buried forever, we return with more of this horse shit. As I said, I've been off for a couple of months, I think, for no real reason other than I didn't really have a ton of time. I've been super, super busy lately, especially on the weekends. And also, I don't know, like not a ton to talk about. A few of the movies that came out since last episode, which dealt with Captain America Civil War, were movies that I was planning to go see and talk about, but ended up not, like Warcraft and X-Men Apocalypse, which were apparently not very good or okay, but didn't really generate a lot of buzz. I also saw Star Trek Beyond, and I thought it was pretty good. Like a lot of people liked it. It was certainly better than Into Darkness. I think it's put this franchise back on the right track. I think like next movie could actually be like legitimately good. This one suffered from a little bit of like samey, kind of like villain story that you see in every Star Trek movie. A little bit of like MacGuffin-y alien weapon kind of thing. But what it did really well was the same thing I felt that the original, like the 2009 reboot did well, which was sort of capture the sort of the vibe of the characters. Had a lot of good like Bones and Spock stuff. It had a lot of like good character quirks and good interactions. And also it kind of had that sort of Star Trek-y plot, like, oh, they're marooned on an alien planet and there's some alien with some mission and they got to stop him, whatever. It did feel very Star Trek-y, which is good. So despite its flaws, it was actually a fun movie, and I am now excited to see what this franchise will yield now that Bob Orci and who's the other guy? Kirkman aren't on it anymore, because I'm not a fan of theirs. But that's not what I'm going to be talking about this week. I actually don't have really any news to discuss this week, so I'm going to focus on two things that I watched. One of them is Suicide Squad, but we're going to get to that later. We're going to start first with Stranger Things, which I just finished watching this weekend. I've been waiting for this show for a long time, and there's been a good sort of buzz about it. It looked like just the trailer and also the poster made it look really, really cool. We're gonna get into it. I'm not gonna be very spoilery. I don't know if I'm even gonna be spoilery at all. We'll see how this goes, because I'm not really interested in dissecting the plot. This is more about, getting people to maybe watch it, because I don't know that. Now the buzz is slowly spreading, and I know that more people are going to check it out. But it did feel like at first like not many people were talking about it, but I think now is a bit of a different story. So Stranger Things, a Netflix original show by the Duffer Brothers. I read somewhere that it was like somebody took Amblin Entertainment and distilled it into one show, which I think is a pretty good description. Amblin Entertainment, obviously the Spielberg production company, along with Kathleen Kennedy, who's now heading Lucasfilm. But they made stuff like E.T. and The Goonies back in the 80s. A lot of like fantasy adventure movies with a lot of kids stuff, like Back to the Future. I'm just looking at their movies. Inner Space, that's another one. Batteries Not Included. That movie's fucking great. Roger Rabbit. Some Gremlins stuff. And then later into the 90s, stuff like Arachnophobia, Hook is also Amblin. Jurassic Park, also Amblin. But they're 80s fare and stuff. There's also movies that aren't Amblin that I feel like this show really evoked to me, most notably Flight of the Navigator. But again, we're going to get to that in a little bit. So this show, it takes place in the 80s. It's about a group of like sort of geeky kids, and weird things are happening in the town that they live in. And, there's some parents, and there's the sheriff, and there's kids who are younger and kids who are older, junior high, high school, and such. And it's very weird, but in a good way. It's very well made. And one of the things I really enjoyed about it was that it was very 80s, but it was not like constantly like smash you over the head with it like Hot Tub Time Machine or like Life on Mars, which was full of like 70s references. It had a little bit of that, but at first I was a little bothered, but then something occurred to me, which is that if you watch one of those movies from the 80s, E.T., as I said, Flight of the Navigator, Goonies, those movies are full of 80s references because they were referencing the pop culture of the time. It's like if you watch a comedy now and somebody mentions Snapchat or YouTube or memes or, I don't know, fucking Pokemon Go, stuff that's going on now in a movie. If you then watch that movie like 10 years later, it doesn't feel like, you know what, it just feels like it was a product of that time. So there's a lot of 80s stuff here, like, 80s shows and 80s products, and they're drinking like out of the old school soda cans, and all the music is very 80s, and they're referencing things of the time, actors and whatnot. But it doesn't feel like the filmmaker, the creators are trying to smash you over the head with it. It feels like something that was made in the 80s and is full of 80s references. Going to go back to Flight of the Navigator for a second. If you haven't seen this movie, I think it probably still holds up and is a very fun movie. It's a movie about a kid in the 1970s who gets abducted by aliens and is returned years later in the mid 80s, like 7 or 8 years later, after, for him, like no time has passed at all. Like a second has passed, but then he's back in the forest where he was abducted like 8 years later, and he finds his way back to his family, who are now older. His younger brother is older than he is, and all of a sudden he's now in the 80s, and he's taken to a government facility because all of a sudden this kid who's been missing for 8 years turns up, and he's no older. He's still the same age. So obviously the government are like, this is really weird. Now that movie is full of 80s stuff, Twisted Sister videos and weird, very, very 80s, all the 80s clothes and all the 80s hair. And it was made in the 80s. The point of it was to show how weird that decade would look to someone who was transplanted from the 1970s into the 1980s. So like imagine taking somebody from the 90s and putting them in our time right now. So if you made a movie about that, you would want to like hammer home how weird the stuff from current pop culture would look like for someone who's like 10 or 15 years out of date. So it works in that way. And so if Flight of the Navigator was made now about the 80s, people would say like, ugh, it's full of 80s references and stuff. But that's what they did. They didn't go about it like, let's make this about 80s references. It was like, let's make this about pop culture references of now. So, it feels very authentic. And I think when I finished watching Stranger Things, the thing that I said about it that I think is its crowning achievement is that it really nails that sort of charming character vibe. It has really good, interesting characters, really good kid actors, for example. Their interactions between them and everything's very charming in a way that's sort of kind of lost on like in shows and movies of now. Like kids now are kind of different. It's a little hard to put your finger on it, but now everybody has to be like super witty and super cool, and they're these geeky kids, and their dialogue and their lines are all very sort of, they feel very natural, which I thought was really cool. Another thing I liked, and this is, I would say, no, you know what? I'm going to keep it vague enough so that this won't even count as a spoiler. But a thing that I liked about it is that it didn't dwell on the thing of like, oh, something weird's going on and nobody believes me. I really don't like that. This got relatively quickly to a point where most of the main characters get together and are like, okay, something really weird is going on here. Let's figure it out, as opposed to one character knowing that it's a thing, and then for the entire show, nobody believes them and nobody believes them. That's really stale to me. There's a movie called Drag Me to Hell. It's, I think, a Sam Raimi movie with Justin Long, and I can't remember who the lead woman in it is. But the main character says to her boyfriend, "I've been cursed by a witch, and there's demons chasing me and stuff." And he just goes like, "Okay, that sounds really weird, but like, I trust you, I love you, so I'm gonna believe what you're telling me, and we're gonna try to fight these together." I thought that was really clever, because most shows and movies will be like, take the road where he thinks she's crazy, like, "Oh, let's get you to a doctor because you're hallucinating," and it's just like, no, that's so boring. Like, it's way more interesting to me where something happens that's like undeniable, and all the characters are like, okay, we all just saw a monster, so we know that monsters are real, so now let's kill this monster. And this show kind of does that a little. So as I said, 80s music. A movie that I like is a very obscure movie that I like, a Canadian movie called Beyond the Black Rainbow. And this gave me kind of vibes of that. It's really artsy. It's hard for me to recommend to everybody because it's like a weird, has no dialogue, almost no dialogue, and it's just a really kind of weird, abstract visual. It's all about like the visuals and the evocative imagery and stuff. But it is also done to feel like it's an 80s thing. Has a lot of like synth heavy music, kind of like this show, and it's also about someone who's in a facility. Never mind. You know what? I'm not gonna go into it because, again, spoilers. And I really like watching things without knowing too much about them. So I don't like spilling the beans for other people so that they can enjoy it in the same capacity. Winona Ryder was really good in the show, as was the guy who played the sheriff. He was in Suicide Squad too. I don't know that guy's name, but I should, because he was good. It had a little bit of cliche. Again, the cliche stuff that happened in this show felt authentic because it felt very 80s. So it was almost like they were borrowing story cliches from that period as opposed to just doing them themselves. They also kind of subverted a few cliches in a clever way. Spoiler alert for the next 20 seconds. No, you know what? Fuck it. I'm not going to even say it. It's not important. Whatever. Like I said, it has some cliche stuff, but it doesn't feel groany. It feels like they were just making something that feels like it was made back then. So some of the cliches sort of come with that territory. So yeah, Stranger Things. And I was just reading the other day that this show was rejected about 15 times from various networks until it landed on Netflix and is now doing really well. I'm not exactly sure how Netflix measures its the success of its shows. I mean, they obviously have counters to see how many times people view them and stuff, but I don't know their calculation, because if you're a network, like a TV network, like ABC or NBC, there's a very easy metric for how you measure your stuff. You get your Nielsen ratings, and then you have ads. And so depending on your Nielsen ratings and depending on how many people check it out then on VOD and stuff, you can charge more ads, and then your ad revenue goes up. And that's basically, in a very general way of speaking, the way you measure whether or not your show is doing well. Netflix is different. I don't know if they have some kind of calculation on whether or not people subscribe specifically to see these things, or maybe renew subscriptions, or like I said, I really don't know. I see a lot of buzz about it. I saw a lot of people talking about it. And I did read that Netflix is considering it a success and they want to make more seasons of this show and whatnot. And I was thinking how interesting it is that Netflix has really transitioned from a video on demand service, basically a kind of like video store that exists in your house, and you can it has a huge library of movies and shows, and you can watch it. It's transitioning from being that to being an original content producer and producing legitimately good original content across a variety of genres. They have sitcoms and talk shows, and they have drama shows and action shows. There's even movies coming on Netflix. They're producing an anime right now. They've exclusively licensed anime before. Like if you see a Netflix original anime, what they call, it's not actually original. Knights of Sidonia, Ajin, and also Seven Deadly Sins and Glitter Force, a couple of shows like that are not made by Netflix. They're exclusively licensed to air in the West on Netflix. They call that original, but that's not true. However, they are actually making an original anime now. It's not them that's making it. It's a production house in Japan, but Netflix basically is financing this and set this project in motion, and that's going to be like a legitimately like Netflix original. It's going to air nowhere except Netflix. Knights of Sidonia aired on like DS11, whatever, some channel in Japan, and then when it came to the West, Netflix had exclusive airing rights. But this is a different thing. So like they're working on different genres and different kinds of content, and their content is highly regarded. House of Cards and Orange is the New Black, and like this Stranger Things, and I don't know what. I'm sure there's other shows that I'm just totally blanking on right now. Oh, of course, you got your Marvel shows, Daredevil, which had 2 great seasons, Jessica Jones, and now they're getting ready to pump out Luke Cage in September, and then Iron Fist in November, and then they're going to have The Defenders, and then they're going to have Punisher and Daredevil season 3. Like they're really putting their foot like hard on the gas with original content, and have really sort of made their mark as a place that also makes its own stuff and doesn't just use stuff from other people. And I mean, good for them. Like that's a good like adaptive business model, because as other places began to get their own streaming services, Netflix is offering, like their sort of library got smaller. HBO was like, we don't want to give you our stuff. We have our own. We have HBO Go. And some other company was like, no, we're going to do this other thing. So after that kind of the hit that Netflix took with its selection, it's now kind of bouncing back by doing stuff on its own and going out there and trying to find good things to make. Not just, I don't know, like it doesn't feel like it used to be that it sort of internet based or like non-TV based entities would make lesser products. And nobody can argue that Netflix shows now are of a lesser quality than, say, a show that's on HBO or FX. They have top-notch A+ level shows, and Stranger Things, no exception. It's a really solid, really awesome show. If you like the X-Files, if you like E.T., you're definitely going to enjoy it. So that's all about all I got to say about Stranger Things, because like I said, I don't want to like spoil it or anything. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Suicide Squad, which I saw yesterday. Now, Batman v Superman. Let's back up for a second. I also recently watched last week. I watched it. I think the ultimate cut of Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. I'll say this about it. It's some things about it mitigate some of the big problems that I had with Batman v Superman. However, the problem is that for the most part, what the ultimate cut does is it eliminates confusion from some plot points. But that wasn't the biggest problem with that movie by a long shot. It was the characterization, and it was creative choices made by the director and by the studio. That's what really bogs down that movie. It's not that you don't understand this plot point or that plot point. However, some of those things are better explained. And one thing that I saw that they added, which to me was actually a very positive change, was that they implied that the fact that Batman is now very murdery and kills a lot of people and is extremely violent is a very recent development, and that he was not always like that. That's something that I think was sorely missing from the theatrical cut, and it's just hand waved away in like 2 lines of dialogue. You know what I mean? Like Alfred says something like, you weren't always like this, Mr. Wayne, or something like that. It's just very brief, very easy to have kept it in, and I thought made actually a pretty substantial difference. Anyway, ultimate cut aside, the reason I'm saying this is because right before Suicide Squad's release, I think it was Entertainment Weekly put out this article talking about the huge production difficulties that apparently went on behind the scenes on the set of Suicide Squad. And the massive reshoots. There were big reshoots at some point, and there were rumors that after there was one trailer that came out that was kind of goofy and was it the Bohemian Rhapsody one, or was that one of those like Guardians of the Galaxy style rock songy funny trailers that made a huge splash? And at the time there was a rumor that a lot of the reshoots were done because the movie wasn't funny at all. They scraped together every joke from the movie and they put them together in one trailer. And then people lost their minds and the studio went, wait, our movie's not like this at all. We really got to like reshoot and rewrite some stuff and re-edit it to make it kind of more funny and more cool. Now, there were denials. I think David Ayer flat out denied this and said, no, this isn't true. That's bullshit. These are rescheduled. These were pre-planned and you always do this and blah, blah, blah. Now, having watched Suicide Squad, I can tell you that those reports are most likely 100% correct. This movie clearly underwent a subsequent major shift in tone, and the result is a very disjointed, tonally awkward movie. Now, step back. This movie wasn't terrible. Okay? It was better than Batman v Superman, certainly. There were things about it that I enjoyed. Overall, I don't think I really liked it. It's kind of boring in parts, which is kind of surprising. I don't know if you anticipate a movie like Suicide Squad to be boring, but it had a lot of like dead parts that kind of dragged along. But before we get to that, as I said, some very awkward, very apparent attempts to spruce it up, put in more jokes, make it more cool. In particular, the use of songs and how they're used. Very awkward. You don't really notice. I think I've said this on this podcast before, and I've said it elsewhere before. I studied audio post-production for film. The inserting of sound effects and the sound editing of a movie and use of music and stuff. And it's a transparent art, meaning that if you do your job really well, nobody notices that somebody did a job. If you see an explosion, some kind of alien machine explode in a movie, and you hear it explode, and the sound sounds to you like that's the sound of the thing you're watching, that means the sound editor did their job perfectly. If you're thinking about that and you're going like, oh, that sounds like they took, a drill press and they superimposed it over the sound of a jackhammer and then they added whatever. If you can hear all of that in those nuts and bolts, that the process, that means the person didn't do their job well. Same thing with soundtrack. If musical cues and songs are interwoven into the movie in a skillful way, you don't notice it. Here, you notice it. It's just like scene, change scene, cue song, change scene, cue song. And they're very apparent choices. They're very hack choices. They're very rushed choices. Look at Guardians of the Galaxy, which I'm going to have to keep going back to. And I'm going to probably jump to talk about Star Trek Beyond a little more in a minute because it also ties into this. What James Gunn did with Guardians of the Galaxy and his use of the songs because of Quill's mixtape that his mother gave him, first of all, it's an element of the story, right? The only souvenir that Quill has of his darling dead mother is the mixtape that she made him for his birthday. And those songs and the way where he uses which songs and how the scene is affected by the songs is just purely masterful. Like, just terrific. Tarantino, very good at that kind of stuff as well. Not so much anymore. I mean, he just doesn't really do it as much anymore. But in his older movies, like the use of songs and which songs, they didn't have to be on the nose. They were clever uses. They were clever choices. And here it's the exact opposite. It's just, it's almost like the use of music in like a reality show. Just very rushed. Clearly not a lot of thought went into it. They were like, just shove a Creedence song here and just shove an Eminem song there. And it's not, like I said, the process is very apparent. Like, you as a lay viewer can sit there and go like, I know why they use that song. I clearly they were like, oh, we need to spruce up the scene. So just shove in an old school rock song. Now, Star Trek Beyond did this with Sabotage, the Beastie Boys' Sabotage. However, there's two mitigating factors to it. One, it's related to the plot. I'm not going to say how because spoilers, whatever. It's related to the plot. Two, it's a callback to the first movie because that song plays in the first movie when young Kirk is stealing his stepdad's car. And there's also a line in the movie where kind of it reminds you that it's a callback. That makes it okay. They also call it classical music, which I thought was hilarious. But here it's just like student film level weird. And because like I said, this isn't a spoiler, but like in the beginning, it has a couple of vignettes like showing you Deadshot, showing you Harley, like in their prison cells or whatever. And that's how it works. It's like scene, cut to Deadshot, cue music, it's like, and then like that scene ends, and then it's like cut to Harley in her cell, and cut to a song, you don't know me, and then it does this over and over, and it's just like so weird. And then later on, it kind of goes away, meaning that it's pretty obvious that a lot of that stuff was just shoved in the beginning. Like the latter half of the movie is way more serious and way more dramatic. And then some of the parts that happen there feel very clashy with the stuff that happens earlier on that's like more lighthearted and more fun. So then there's a scene where Deadshot is taking down all these enemies, and it's very dramatic, and there's this crazy like orchestral musical theme that goes on, and he's yelling, and it's in slow motion, and you're like, weren't we just having fun like 15 minutes ago? I was listening to an Eminem song as Harley Quinn's trying to figure out what she's gonna wear, and it's all goofy and stuff, and now it's like with rain and lightning, and it's like Batman v Superman. You know what I mean? Like and as I said, the article that came out right before the movie was released said that David Ayer's vision was way darker and more somber, and that apparently the studio did a bunch of reshoots, and there were competing edits. There were like 2 edits going around of the movie. It also came out that most of the Joker stuff was cut from the movie. Apparently, Jared Leto not happy about that, which leads me into my next point. One thing that I'll say in favor of this movie that I thought was they were going to do and I was going to hate, and they didn't do it all. I thought it was going to be really faux, over-the-top edgy all the time. Like, oh, look at these guys. They're so crazy. They're bad guys and they're crazy. And one of the reasons was because of the Leto antics that they kept saying. They were like, oh my God, Jerry, he's so method. He's sending everybody dead rats and rotten food. He's such a crazy guy. So I thought it was going to be that. It was really understated. Like the Joker kind of feels like a gangster. Like a not a gangsta, like a gangster. Like Scarface, but not as crazy, believe it or not. He's the Joker, and Tony Montana is like a more over the top character than him. It's really weird. Like, you would think that this was a perfect chance to be super over the top, especially in this movie, which is in certain ways like very kind of crazy and stuff. But he's very subdued. He's very low key. Just a little bit confusing. I liked Will Smith in it. I liked Margot Robbie. So I liked Deadshot and I liked Harley Quinn. I thought Will Smith played a pretty interesting jerk. Like, I some of the stuff I heard about it before the movie came out made me think he was going to be this righteous, because apparently Deadshot in the comics is just a killer. And here they were saying, like, they were trying to make the case that he only killed bad guys and stuff like that. So I thought they were going to moralize about what an amazing guy he is, and that's not really true. I mean, he loves his daughter and he doesn't kill women and children or whatever, but he's like a jerk. And Margot Robbie, fun Harley Quinn. One thing that you don't notice in that you can't really notice in the trailers that I was pleasantly surprised was that she puts on the thick Harley Quinn accent. Which I thought was nice and charming and made her more interesting. And in general, I thought she did a good job. Like a good casting and like some good moments with her, certainly. Where like you see a little bit of her like vulnerable side, but she keeps trying to put on like a brave face. But yeah, again, seems to suffer the same problem as Batman v Superman, in the sense that DC doesn't know what it's trying to do. It doesn't know what it's trying to do. It's not really sure of the tone, the general tone that it wants. There is no clear hierarchy of who does what, because clearly what happened here was that David Ayer gave them a movie that they were not happy with. And they sort of tried to, like scramble like at the last minute to try and like save it, kind of like what happened with Fantastic Four. So once again, they're left with something that's sort of tonally odd, not really regarded as being good in any sense of the word, although it seems to be on track to make a lot of money, which to me is the worst case scenario. Like, I'd rather, if they make a movie that's like a mess, I'd rather it not do well, so that they can that could maybe like spur them on to do better and to try to kind of learn from their mistakes. I don't know if that's what's going to happen here. I will say that if they want to make another one, like if they're going to make a Suicide Squad 2, or if they're going to incorporate some of these characters then into like the Batman movie or the Flash movie, it could work. There is sort of interesting stuff to do here. I just wish that this came later in the game. I think DC's problems all can be reduced to one central issue, which is that they did not put in the kind of time that Marvel did establishing their cinematic universe. So Deadshot, Harley Quinn and the Joker should have been introduced in a Batman movie. Captain Boomerang, maybe El Diablo, introduced in a Flash movie. Maybe Enchantress introduced in a Superman movie. Maybe Enchantress could be introduced in a Wonder Woman movie, because she's kind of ancient and some kind of like, mystical being or whatever. You do that, then you have your ensemble movie. This is the second ensemble movie that Marvel has done, that DC has done, and they haven't done individual movies yet. Man of Steel doesn't count because it wasn't supposed to be part of a cinematic universe. They built it, they retconned it. So think about this. The only two properly DC cinematic movies DC Cinematic Universe movies we have right now are Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, which also has Wonder Woman and Lex Luthor, and some Flash and a little bit of like the other members of the Justice League or whatever ensemble movie. And we have Suicide Squad, which has Deadshot and El Diablo and Killer Croc and Harley Quinn and the Joker and Captain Boomerang and Slipknot and Enchantress and Rick Flag and others that I'm not going to reveal. Two big ensemble movies that would have worked way better if the elements in them were set up in individual movies. Because by the time we got to the Avengers, we had two Iron Man 1 and 2, and we had Captain America, and we had Thor. And then before the second one, between these ensemble movies, we get a lot of setup. We get an Iron Man movie, and we get Captain America, the second Captain America, and we get Ant-Man, and we get TV shows, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Agent Carter. We get all kinds of one-shots. We get a lot of setup, and Marvel even stumbled a bunch of times. There are many, especially in the earlier phases of Marvel, there are a bunch of movies that are not great. Iron Man 2 is not great. Iron Man 3 is not great. The first Captain America is half of it's pretty good. The two Thor movies are not terrific. Ant-Man is not terrific. Avengers Age of Ultron is not terrific. But they all have elements that then play into later movies, add subsequently to other movies. Like Age of Ultron, like I said, not a great movie. However, a lot of the stuff in it then helps set up Civil War, which is a great movie. So in the end, it serves a purpose. And DC, the one thing DC were like, we're not going to do this, is that. And that's the one thing they should have done. They tried to rush it because they're trying to play catch up with Marvel. And I don't think they have to. Why? Who cares? If anything, taking their time would have helped DC, because Marvel's going to eventually run out of steam, because they're going to start reverting to second and third tier characters. Because how many, Iron Man, you're going to have Iron Man leaving, so you're either going to have someone take up Tony Stark's mantle as Iron Man, or you're eventually going to run out of Iron Man, Thor, Captain America movies. You're going to have to move on to other Marvel characters. If DC waited, if DC was like, we're going to take our time, we're going to make 2 Batman movies, and we're going to make 2 Superman movies, and we're going to make 2 Wonder Woman movies, and then later we're going to do Justice League. By the time they get there, they don't have any competition. Marvel's busy with stage 6 now and doing characters you've never heard of. That's DC. All kinds of stuff you've never heard of. And that's when DC's like, now we're going to do our fucking Justice League movie. Then they're going to be the number one player. Instead, they're racing to catch up and hurting themselves in the process, which is a shame, because I like DC and they're not doing this right. And at this point, I think it's just a matter of time until they scrap everything and restart. And I don't care. I know people hate remakes and reboots and reboots, and I don't mind. Just do it well. Just learn the lesson of your previous failure and do it well. Star Wars, good example. They were like, here's what we need to not do. And I know a lot of people don't like The Force Awakens, but those people are wrong, because The Force Awakens is good. And the rumors about Rogue One have me very concerned, because there's similar rumors regarding Rogue One as there were about Suicide Squad. Reshoots, other people helming reshoots, trying to change the tone that the director established. For the life of me, I do not understand that. I do not understand how you get to the point where you have essentially a finished movie and the studio's like, oh no, that's not what we wanted. We wanted something else. How do you even get that far before realizing that the thing that you have is not the thing that you want? And also, you hire a person, why are you hiring creative people if you're then going to override them? If non-creative people are then going to override them. Now I understand it is their product and blah, blah, blah. I understand the real world circumstances around the making of a movie. I understand that movies are at the same time artistic expressions and consumer products, and that essentially the will of the people who are pushing it as a consumer product is more important because it's they're financing it. They have the stake in it. If a movie fails, a director doesn't really stand to lose anything, whereas the studio stands to lose everything. The director already gets paid. I know they might have some back end or whatever that they don't get, but the point is like they get paid to make a movie and they make it, and that's their movie. If the movie fails, the studio is the one that's left with like picking up the pieces of that, not the director. So I understand that. What I don't understand is that there's so many examples of that kind of thing hurting, probably more than there are of it helping. This whole idea of like, retroactive, trying to like readjust a movie to make it different than what it was originally. Typically not a good idea. So sometimes maybe you're just better off like biting the bullet and saying like, look, this isn't exactly what I wanted, but trying to change it now is going to make it even worse. So worst case scenario, it's not going to be as popular as I thought it would, but at least it's cohesive because that's the thing this is the product that I got from the people I hired to make it. So yeah, Suicide Squad. It's okay. It's all right. I know probably a bunch of people are going to like it in the vein of Transformers, although it is, I would say, better than your average Transformers movie. It was just not, like I said, it was disjointed and it lacked like a continuous sort of plot thread to keep me interested. It had a lot of dead time. And you know what? I'm going to just do a quick spoilery thing to end. So I will say this. This has been episode 12 of the Neoncast. You can check me out on Twitter. I'm at Neon Taster. The podcast has its own Twitter account at Neoncast that you can mention if you want me to talk about things. If you want to talk specifically about the things that I spoke today, I get a lot of tweets at my main account. So often, like, I can forget and miss tweets. If you tweet at Neoncast, I'm most likely going to see it. It pops up on a different feed for me in TweetDeck. And I also have an email address, neoncastpod@gmail.com, that you can write if you have long-form things to write to me about. I don't know. The frequency of this podcast has always been a little spotty. It's going to continue to be a little spotty. I don't know when I'm going to make another episode. There isn't really anything that I'm super excited about before Doctor Strange, which is still like 2.5 months away. But I'm gonna try and do. I'm definitely gonna try and do stuff before that. I mean, maybe when X-Men Apocalypse and Warcraft hit like a home release, I can like watch both of them and then come back and do a make good about those two movies and how I feel about them. I also know that there's Assassin's Creed coming out later this year, Rogue One, as I've mentioned before. But all in all, 2016 shaping up to be a year of disappointments. A year of disappointments. Last really, really good one was Deadpool, I think. Wait, no. When was Civil War? Now I don't even remember. See? Anyway, right. So like the last bit of spoilery thing that really confused me about him. So you find out in Suicide Squad that the plan was for them to rescue, what's her name? The woman who leads the Suicide Squad, who is in a building in Midway City. Then later they defeat Enchantress, but that wasn't the plan. I don't get that. The whole point of the Suicide Squad was like, we need this team that has metahumans on it. The war is now with the metahumans. And look, there's a big metahuman thing happening, so we need these people. But that's not why they use them. They use them to evacuate VIPs from Midway City. They had no plan on how to defeat Enchantress. This Suicide Squad just ended up doing it just because. Like, they randomly, because Rick Flag was like, I got to go rescue my girl or whatever. So... like, they didn't have any plan. So what, the world was going to be just, they were going to let the world get destroyed? Like, I don't get it. That's a really weird weird like plot point. But yeah, so anyway, that's that. And like I said, on that note, I'm going to end. So I will see you all pretty soon on the Neoncast. So thanks for listening if you have been listening. And if not, then